So let's talk about your story.
My parents met working for the same airline back in the early 80s. And then my dad got a contract when I was 9, 10 years old in Malawi. It was the life as a kid, but it also came with a lot of hard learnings and a couple of quite dangerous burglaries. There was one where my dad was literally face to face with a group of guys with machetes. There was some dangerous times as well. His work in Kenya led to us being on an aircraft that was hijacked, which was the most dangerous situation I've been in. It was the end of the year 2000. It was a single Kenyan man with severe mental health issues who had written a suicide note and was prepared to take 400 people with him.
Did this have an impact to you taking substance?
Complex trauma growing up, and that continued well into adulthood. I was on that flight aged 11. I didn't think it really affected me at the time, but looking back, it clearly did. 11, 12 years old, I started drinking. 13, I started smoking weed regularly and smoking cigarettes at 13. 14, like daily, just being totally reckless. And this coincided with a complete decline in my academic performance. That was just how I learned to cope with all the stuff I was going through at the time. It was through drugs, alcohol, and sex, and really learned how to hide it very well. The point where it really dawned on me how much I was covering up my own addiction was when I heard about the concept of living in the shadow. If you're not speaking to someone about what you're going through, the one thing I would say is please open up to someone. Each time you speak about something, shame has less and less power over you.
My name is Rugare Gomo, and I'm your high performance life coach. I work with all people who want to bring their dreams and goals to life with velocity. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, retirees, moms, dads, innovators, all people. People who work with me have said that they experience more freedom, more joy, more peace of mind, creativity. If this is you today, come and work with me and have your bam moment that will change the trajectory of your life forever. Visit my website at www.rugaregomo.com. Hello, everybody. My name is Rugare Gomo, and I am your high performance life and business coach. This show exists to inspire and empower you to dream, forge your own path, and be the leader in your life. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce you today to Hamish Noah. Hi, Hamish.
Hi, Rugare.
A little bit about Hamish. Hamish is an addiction recovery coach and HIV advocate based in London, UK. In 2020, following a diagnosis of late-stage HIV, Hamish began a journey of recovery from 20 years of compulsive substance use and high-functioning addiction. He uses mindfulness and coaching, two things that changed his life, to help men who are struggling with addiction to break free from the cycle of relapse. Hello, Hamish, once again, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Rugare. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you after being connected online.
Yes. I've been dying to have this conversation with you because one of the things I love is your openness and authenticity. So in late 2020, so this is like the beginning of the end of the first year of COVID, you got diagnosed with late stages of HIV.
Start of 2020.
The start of 2020.
Yeah, January 2020. Actually, if I hadn't been diagnosed then, COVID would have been very dangerous for me. I don't think I had COVID in the first wave. I think I would have known, but no, I was diagnosed 2 months before the first lockdown in the UK.
Wow.
January 2020, yeah.
And now we're in 2024 and you're talking about it. You know, I saw a lot of your posts on LinkedIn and of course on Instagram, and you've been very open, educating all of us all around the world about your diagnosis, how to keep us safe, how to keep yourself safe, and how you've been healing from all of this. I think that's very brave. You know, why I wanted to have this conversation is, you know, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and in the early 90s, Zimbabwe had the highest rates of HIV in the world. And of course, to be diagnosed with HIV then is a death sentence.
Mhm.
So, and 1 in 4 adults, were HIV positive. So I've had uncles, aunts, friends, die from HIV and AIDS related illnesses. And even today, there's still a lot of stigma of even revealing this. But yet here you are, full of life, a big smile, and talking about it. So let's talk about your story. Tell us more about your diagnosis and the life that you lived beforehand that led to all of this.
Sure. So I was diagnosed in January 2020. Yeah, as you said at the beginning, it was really the tail end of 20 years of using drugs, alcohol, sex as an escape, as a way to sort of numb my pain, as well as for pleasure. Just want to point that out. I was, in a on paper, normal life, working a day job, a second job, and life was good in many ways. But I had real issues with my drug use behind closed doors, and there were times it got worse in life. There were times it wasn't so bad. It came and went in waves, and how it showed up in my life changed, over the course of from when I was 13, 11, 12, 13 to when I was 30. It had many peaks and troughs, and yeah, escalated in the years before my diagnosis. And the diagnosis was a total shock to me, total shock. And that's why it was a late stage diagnosis, because I really was completely shocked. One of the things about addiction is you live in denial a lot of the time, unfortunately, before you reach a stage where you're even contemplating making changes to the real issues. And I was in denial about how much I was putting myself at risk. So it was a complete shock. It was the turning point in my life that led to over 4.5 years now of pretty intense personal growth and big changes in my life.
So, when you got your diagnosis and you were shocked about it, in the past 4 years, you've turned your life around, which is very inspiring. So, what have you done in your life to turn your life around?
It's a good question. And it sounds, you put it that way, it sounds so dramatic. When I said turning point, but you said turned your life around. There was so much about my life that was great before I was diagnosed. As I said, I've come from a 10, 15-year career in the nonprofit sector. I've come from 20-year, I'm still in a 20-year career as a DJ and on the side. And life was so good in so many ways. I traveled a lot, lived a really fun life. But the turning point was with the problem substance use and the problem behaviors and reckless behaviors, like losing 1 or 2 nights of sleep routinely, and using drugs like crystal meth, which people wouldn't associate with someone who works a 9 to 5 and has a side job and lives a normal life. So to my colleagues at work, they wouldn't have noticed a huge difference, but to my partner at the time and to my friends and my family, it was a complete change in the way I was living from that point. And the things that helped me, two things that really helped me had been there for a few years before. So as I said, things happened in peaks and troughs, and addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a result of things that have happened in the past and the way our minds have been shaped, or the way we've learned to behave over time. And so I went through a really crap time in 2016, 17. And my partner at the time helped me to realize that I needed to start therapy. So I actually started therapy 3 or 4 years before I was diagnosed. And I started meditation around that time as well. And that was, so I'd had 3 years of this stuff that helps, but I wasn't talking about everything in therapy during that time with that therapist, let's say. I hadn't yet spoken about everything. And there's a long list of things that I think I've needed to cover in therapy over the last few years, but things that had helped me started before my diagnosis. But there are a few other things that really helped. So yeah, if I list a few of the things that really helped me, as I say, therapy and meditation continued past when I was diagnosed. My partner at the time was, and I say this because I really consider that she saved my life, to be honest, because she was my biggest support through not just when I was diagnosed, but as I say, the period when I started therapy. I think I can't overstate the value of having someone with you who is fighting your corner, who is holding a mirror up to you, who's encouraging you to do things that will make you a better person and that will help you grow. And sometimes that doesn't happen if you don't have that person next to you. Someone who's willing to tell you things that you probably don't want to hear, and to yeah, and to tell you things with sometimes brutal honesty that some friends or family members might not, or other people around you might not. So I owe so much to my partner at the time, Liz. She knows this, and that that's something I just really wanted to say. Recovery groups played a huge part. 12-step recovery groups, so things like Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, AANA, CA. There's lots of different ones, but recovery groups played a big part, especially in the first year of my recovery. When I was diagnosed, I stopped drinking, smoking, using drugs. Liz was helping me get on the turmeric shots every day, and it was a whole bunch of things. But the groups were somewhere, recovery groups were somewhere I could go and share about my diagnosis quite quickly, which was honestly, it was a huge lifesaver, going through something like that to share it. And then further down the line, and at the time, sorry, I started journaling. And now I realize coaching myself. At the time, I didn't know at the time, but I'd been coaching in my non-profit job for years, and journaling is a form of kind of coaching yourself. You're reflecting, you're planning, you're tracking your progress, and there were other things that followed, like men's communities, retreats, books, podcasts, and then eventually having coaches myself, and discovering Buddhism as well in my life. So there's a long
Extraordinary.
list, as you can
Extraordinary.
tell.
Yeah, I completely relate to your story. In 2020, I discovered that I'm a sex addict and I've been using and abusing sex to numb pain. And of course, being an addict has nothing to do with the thing in itself, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, etc., TV, whatever it is. And it was the thing I was using to numb pain, and underlining my pain were things of not belonging. I am a gay man who grew up in Zimbabwe, and practically all my life, I've been told I need to be eradicated. I shouldn't exist because I'm gay. That's utterly painful. It's traumatic. And then I'm also a black man as well, and in a predominantly Eurocentric world. And the belief systems that we're brought up with is, as a black person, you need to work 10 times harder than a white person. And I can go on and on. So I think for a lot of people, there is this misconception that addiction is for like losers or like only the homeless, but it has many faces. It has there are no social limits to addiction. And it has nothing to do with what we have on the external. We can have money, we can have cars, we can have a home, but the issue is our relationship with ourselves. And that's what most people never really understood. I didn't understand that. There's no conversation for this on the African continent. And I'm part of a 12-step program, and I'm typically the only Black person, the only African in the room. So, you have lived in many countries yourself. And I recently saw that you wrote and said you grew up in 7 different countries. Tell us a little bit more about that and how this was also linked to your life.
Good question. Yeah, so my parents met working for the same airline back in the early 80s. And my mother's from East Africa. She's from Somalia or Somaliland, the north of Somalia. And my dad is British, English, Scottish. And they met working in Dubai for the same airline. It's a lovely story. I'm not going to go into the details, but they met in Dubai in the 80s. And then because they both worked in aviation, when I was born in 89, my brother in 91, it was a time where although they'd been in the UK for a bit before I was born, it was a period of 7 years, 6 years, basically, of my dad getting quite a lot of different work contracts around Asia, Southeast Asia. So I grew up in 5 countries. By the time I was 6, 5 countries in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Australia, and Singapore. And I only really remember Singapore properly. It was my first memories. And then moved to England aged 6. And then my dad got a contract when I was 9, 10 years old, got a contract in Malawi in Southern Africa. So we moved out there for a year for any British viewers for year 5. I was in Malawi, and I think they called it standard. Standard. I don't know if they had that in Zimbabwe.
They
Standard
did.
6.
They had standards, but that was during my mum and Day's time. And then, of course, Zimbabwe, being a former British colony, we used a
Mm.
similar system in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Malawi, right next door to Zimbabwe. Well, not on the border, but very close. Oh, something that's just come to mind speaking to someone who's from Zimbabwe. I've got Zimbabwean friends now, but it wasn't until 15 years after living in Malawi, so maybe a few years ago, about 10 years ago, where I started to discover or rediscover my love for African music, specifically music from sub-Saharan Africa, maybe from a few decades ago. And one of my favorite music, Sungura music from Zimbabwe. I remember vividly hearing it all over the streets of Malawi growing up. And I've just fallen back in love with it in the last few years. And I mentioned I was a DJ. I've been collecting vinyl records since I was 13 years old. And most of the last decade, it's been a lot of music from all over Africa and including Zimbabwe. And so that period of growing up in my life, I guess 7 countries by the time I was 9 years old, has huge benefits. I've developed the ability to connect with people from any background and any culture, and it's made me adaptable. Given me a wide knowledge of different cultures and things around the world. It's also, I'm discovering, it has come with some consequences, which possibly, is possibly affecting my life. You mentioned belonging. I guess a line that sticks in my mind is like growing up, home was everywhere, but nowhere to me. Yeah, growing up in 7 countries, heritage from 3 countries, and not just that, living in England in an area where people really have everything they would ever want, in the suburbs of London as a kid, in Surrey, and then like being airdropped into Malawi at the time, the lowest income country in the world. at the time. That was an experience. And then back into Surrey in the UK. I can't really explain what that's like for a 10-year-old. It's just
It's
bonkers.
wild. It's
Absolutely
absolutely
bonkers.
wild.
And that has completely shaped my life. That is that year in Malawi, year or so we lived in Malawi, that is the reason I want to help people today. And that is that's clear as day for me, because I saw from a young age what it was like to not have everything that I'd grown up having, and I learned then not to take things for granted, and that I just wanted to help people in some way. Yeah.
It's very powerful because, I grew up in Zimbabwe and people mistake me for being like a wealthy Zimbabwean, but I came from a very low socioeconomic background. It was literally low middle class and then the shanty towns. But because mom and dad made sure that us, the children, got an education, I've been able to create opportunity. And I came to Australia by myself when I was 16 years old, one bag, one backpack, and $300, and the values my mom and my dad gave me. So, of course, for me being in Australia, I'm like, I'm going to seize every opportunity because I know what it's like back in Zimbabwe. I know what millions of people are dealing with on a daily basis. And the exposure, like you said, travel has been one of my greatest teachers in life. Travel for me has created the depth of empathy that I never would have had I remained in one culture. And there's a
Mm.
saying, of course, to live and to only know one culture is to know no culture at all. So tell me what this experience in Malawi was like that has had you say, do you know what? I'm going to use my life, helping people. I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be helping people and training them in mindfulness. And that's what you've dedicated yourself to be.
Well, it's not that simple. I wish it was that simple. This experience in Malawi was, I was 9, 10 years old. I remember arriving there as a 9-year-old. Maybe the first time I'd been to Africa. Maybe the second time, because my dad's got like close family friends in South Africa, and obviously because my parents worked for airlines, we got cheap tickets everywhere. So my parents were never rich. Like they made their careers for themselves from when they were young teenagers. My neither of my parents went to university. My dad's worked a 55 plus year career in aviation from working on a ticket desk by Baker Street in London somewhere. And my mum worked from, I think, from when she was 15, 16 to help her mum out because her father had passed away. Some brothers had passed away. She paid for 2 of her brothers to go to university. And then we got free tickets, cheap tickets everywhere. So we just grew up traveling a lot. And yeah, ended up in Malawi with my dad on a contract. And it was, yeah, like I say, first or second country in Africa. First time properly experiencing it, I think. And we moved there. I can't really remember starting at school, but I can vividly remember the first trip to the supermarket because there were a lot of kids outside the supermarket. There were a lot of people out there. I remember people with missing limbs and a lot of poverty, destitute poverty. This is Malawi in 1998. At the time, GDP per capita, the average, like middle income for the country, for the average person in the country was 250 US dollars a year at the time. So that gives you some idea of, us coming in from the UK, going to the supermarket. It was noticeable. Any any family, any family
You're
from,
so diplomatic.
especially a white man, my dad, with a black woman, my mum, and 2 mixed race but slightly Asian looking kids. Didn't go unnoticed. And so we went did our supermarket shop this first time, I remember, and I remember coming out and saying, Dad, can we, we were being asked for money, we were being asked for food, and saying, Dad, please, can we give these kids some food? Can we give them some food? Can we give them some food? And my dad kind of like pulled me away and said, we've got to go. And he sat me, I think he spoke to me in the car or somewhere, and he said, I want to help them too. I really do. I want to help them too. And he said, there's ways to do that. He said, the job I just got, we are helping these people. And they were involved in a charity initiative, working with children on the streets and all sorts through his work. But he said, but we can't come out the supermarket and do this because there will be twice as many people the next day. And he kind of explained it would cause chaos if we just went and did our weekly shop and then handed everything out outside. And we had to learn to help in other ways simply because it would have potentially caused some issues, would have caused some issues maybe among people there. And there were times we did, but we're talking like there was, quite a lot of people. There was quite a lot of people. And it was a hard lesson to learn. I was in tears. I was in complete tears. And, he was like, we are going to be here every day. We're going to be walking here every day, and we can't help everyone every day. This is not the best way. The best way is to do it through, this organization is set up to give people proper support. And that was like so difficult. That was so difficult. And I remember becoming so immersed in Malawian culture that I'd like made friends with the kids in the local neighborhood, and then I would walk barefoot into town, like to the shops with the local kids. I'd walk barefoot, like of course I could afford shoes, but I'd come back with filthy feet. And I was like, 9 years old, 10 years old, and my parents would let me walk up. As a kid, that's what I remember anyway. I don't know if my parents were with me at times. Like I would walk up the hill and walk in up to the shop into town just with the Malawian kids. So school started at 7 a.m., finished at midday. The afternoon was playing sports or swimming or making catapults out of tree branches. And it was the life as a kid. But it also came with a lot of hard learnings like the one I've just mentioned, and a couple of quite dangerous burglaries. There's one where my dad was literally face to face with a group of guys with machetes, and there was some dangerous times as well. And my dad's work in Africa kind of continued for a few years, and actually I mentioned dangerous times. His work in Kenya another year actually led to us being on an aircraft that was hijacked, which was the most dangerous situation I've been in. But
which time was this? Which year was that?
It was the end of the year 2000.
I would not be surprised if you're on the same flight as somebody close to me who lives in Australia, because they were on a flight in Kenya. And of course, we're not painting Kenya as a dangerous country. This only happened once. And him and his girlfriend at the time, now wife, were on the flight. And it was wild.
British Airways flight?
I don't know what flight it was. Now I'm going to have to find out.
I mean, if it was,
it's probably because how many hijackings happen in Kenya? It's very rare.
Not when you say hijacking, people have a lot of assumptions that come to mind about what that looks like. It was a single Kenyan man with severe mental health issues who had written a suicide note and was prepared to take 400 people with him, basically. That was the situation. So it's an isolated incident. It wasn't some sort of organized thing like 9/11 or other hijackings. And I mentioned that as like, I mentioned some dangerous things in Malawi. There's quite a long list of stories from my travels, but that was that's the most extreme one that came from my travels.
So how did this then all influence you then when you're going through your adulthood in the
Yeah.
UK, and did this have an impact to you taking substance? Like, is that why you were taking substances, or is that, what's the connection?
Yeah, sorry, I've realized I didn't fully answer your last question, which was why did that make you, how did that make you want to help people?
Yes.
It was seeing that I just knew, seeing, you know, people living in real poverty. I knew I wanted to help people, but it didn't result in my coaching career. It resulted in me struggling my way through school for many reasons. As I say, that flight I was on, a lot of trauma in my teenage years, and then continuing, and really just like fumbling my way through school. I was like lucky to have a, a great education and great people around me, but I struggled a lot in my teenage years. And then after dropping out of university, having a breakdown, losing a friend, and eventually graduating at 24 years old, I stumbled into during my university years, I'd stumbled into fundraising in the nonprofit sector, and I stumbled into that career. And that was where I found my vocation. That was where I found my, like, okay, this is how I can help people. I found it. I found it, I can work in the charity sector. And this way I can help people living in Malawi, and I can help people living in difficult situations that they have not chosen. And so that's what the thread is. That's then there's 15 years between that and me, or, nearly 15 years between me starting in the nonprofit sector and me beginning a proper new career in coaching. So that thread was always there. But what led to, the substance use and stuff like that, and using, yeah, in firstly alcohol, then drugs and sex, as you mentioned, all three of those things as essentially medication and an escape, and a way to regulate my emotions. It was a mixture of, like I mentioned, that flight I was on, but also, let's just say, complex trauma growing up, and that continued, well into adulthood. And I learned from a young age, from 11 or 12. I was on that flight aged 11. I didn't I didn't think it really affected me at the time, but looking back, I think it clearly did, and it really affected, a lot of things in the couple of years afterwards. But it was 12 years old I started drinking. 13 I started smoking weed regularly, and smoking cigarettes at 13. So by the time I was 13, I was smoking regularly. 14, like daily, and just being totally reckless. And this like coincided with a complete decline in my academic performance. Like I was a pretty smart kid, less smart, but it did not reflect in my grades and in my, like, I got an academic scholarship as a kid. It got taken away
Yeah.
because I was so reckless at school. I got suspended, and the head teachers I'm still in touch with now. There's a teacher I'm in touch with now who used to call me iron lungs or charcoal lungs or something when I was 14, 15,
Wow.
because I was smoking every day, and he knew it. And we're still friends now. And that was just how I learned to cope with whatever, all the stuff I was going through at the time. It was through drugs, alcohol, and sex, and that just continued. And I really learned how to hide it very well. I've spoken to school friends now who had no idea what I was going through at the time. I met one the other day. I'm 35 now. I met a school friend the other day, and I told him all this stuff, and he was like, I had no idea. And we were like best friends at that time. And I've really blocked out a lot of stuff that happened. I've blocked out a lot of how I dealt with it, how I dealt with trauma growing up, because I dealt with it by using substances and
Yes.
by being reckless, not by talking to my friends. Like
Yes.
I didn't tell anyone about what I was going through. I didn't tell anyone. Yeah.
I completely understand. And I think a lot of the misconception is that people who are addicts, like you and I, are bad people, like we have control over it. But one of the things I've been learning is that I did the best I could with the tools I had. And, but the problem is that the tool I had, of course, is also destroying me. But fundamentally, I couldn't talk about any of the things I was dealing with because it was shameful for me. I knew that I didn't even know, by the way, that I was going to use sex as a coping mechanism. I didn't even know it was a coping mechanism. But what I did know was that I wasn't going to be an alcoholic and I wasn't going to be a drug addict because I didn't know how I was going to hide that. That had been so shameful. To be like, oh my God, growing up in Zimbabwe to find out, the son of somebody's family is an alcoholic or became an addict, a drug addict, was so shameful. And I was like, I'm not going to be that. But I still didn't have the tools to regulate. So, of course, in my teenage years, how that manifested was the abuse of sex in
Mhm.
essence, of course. And we know that sex is wonderful and it's great, but then I was using it to hide from the things that I was ashamed of. I was using it to numb the extraordinary pain that I was carrying that I could not talk about. Now, you have found a way to talk about this. You're talking about it here.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to the person who is dealing with that secret, carrying that shame that they feel they cannot talk about? What would you want to say to them?
That's a good question. Um, I'd say if you feel like I think the point where it really dawned on me how much I was covering up my own addiction, covering up my own struggles, and living in denial, in such denial, uh, was when I heard about the concept of living in the shadow. So if you're not speaking to someone, anyone, or people about what you're going through, if you feel like you're living in the shadow, the one thing I would say is please open up to someone. Open up to someone, open up to people around you, whoever you feel you can trust. And it's a process. It's like one by one, it's a process. And that's all I would say, whether it's a therapist, close friend, in a group setting, whatever it might be, and do it in different settings if you can. And there's no shame in it. But each time you speak about something, shame has less and less power over you, and you can free yourself from it.
I'm so touched. Thank you for saying that, Hamish, because that was my utter experience living in the shadows. And the problem was that I felt there was nobody I could share it with because I was so terrified that if I were to tell somebody, they would take their love away and I'd be utterly alone. And I remember that I just couldn't. Every time I imagined, talking to somebody, all I could see was their disgust of me.
Mm.
That's how it showed up for me. And that kept me in the cycle of shame. It kept me in my addiction, So I really love what you said there. It's find somebody to talk to about this, find somebody. And if the first person doesn't work for you, find another person. And that's what happened for me when I was, I think, 18. I remember going to a Christian counselor, shaming myself for being gay, and I had a terrible experience. And then for the next 15 years, I never approached anybody. So, of course, those 15 years led to the horror of my life because that first experience was so awful. So, I do hope people who are listening in in this is that, yes, the first experience may not always be great, but what I keep finding is that people are loving, people are kind, most people are that way, and there are a few rotten eggs. So do take the action to share your story with somebody to free yourself from the shame.
And
Hamish.
yeah, the way you said it there, free yourself. It is like shackles holding you. It is like weights, chains on your feet, like on your around your ankles, weighing you down. And yeah, you mentioned about bad experiences. It might not just be that who you share your experiences doesn't respond in a way that nurtures you or helps you. That might be one scenario. Another scenario, which was my own, is that you might go to a therapist, you might start sharing some stuff, but not everything. And I would really encourage you to open your heart and open up about everything in a space where you feel safe. Everything. And it is freeing. And on the other side of doing that is more happiness.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having the courage to share everything and freeing yourself up, Hamish, because this will help somebody. I know it's already helping me. I'm an addict, so even having this conversation, I have to take my medicine on a daily basis, which is being open about what I deal with every day. That's my medicine. And that frees me up to show up in life every day. So, your generosity is going to help somebody be free. So I'm so grateful that you've shared this with us today. So, Hamish, what does forging your own path mean to you?
I think you mentioned it earlier. Forging your own path to me means authenticity. In one word, it means living a life of authenticity. It means living in alignment with your true belief system and your true values. And what happens is if we are not living an authentic life, or if our values or belief system has been influenced by our surroundings, our environment, as can happen a lot, not just in our immediate environment, but with the online world today, then it can affect your ability to live authentically, like to be you. So forging your own path to me is just do you.
Just do you. That's very powerful. I have a follow-up question to that because many people use that word authenticity. But what the hell does that mean to you?
Means, what would you be like if no one was in the room?
Shaking, moving.
Yeah. um, it's like living by your values, and everyone has a slightly different, or maybe very different set of values. Yeah, one of the things that helped me to rediscover mine or redefine mine and actually visualize that, have physically write them down and have them, is having a coach myself. That's why it was so powerful to me after all these different things I've done over years and years. Then I suddenly did some exercises and some work to understand what my values really are and how engaging in a lot of the things I'd been engaging in for a long time around drugs, alcohol, sex, living recklessly at times. And don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun. I was definitely living out my values with a lot of the time I was on drugs. Trust me, I was, but there were a lot of times I wasn't. There were a lot of times I wasn't. And in order to live an authentic life, to live by your values, you really need to know what they are. You really need to know what matters to you. And then you can ask yourself the question, am I living a life that is true to me and not someone else, not my partner, friends, family, boss, community, no one else. Am I living a life that I want? Because as far as we know, we only get one shot at this thing.
Powerful. I had the same experience, before I discovered my values, I was living out everybody's ideas of who I should be. And that was part of the context of my trauma, trying to be somebody else to please mom and dad, to please my teachers, to please society. And every time I did that, I was robbing myself of my spirit, my heart, my soul, and then having to cope with sex, abusing sex to numb the pain of my life. It's very powerful.
What you've just said has really struck a chord with me as well, because I saw something actually the other day on LinkedIn from someone else who's grown up between cultures, and they called it in-betweenship. Another term I've heard is being like a third culture kid. So I didn't grow up in either of my parents' cultures, and I'm from different cultures to the one I was countries I was growing up in, and so mixed up. So I developed one of the complexities of this is developing the ability to like be a chameleon, like to show up in any room, any culture, any dynamic, whether it's in a school classroom or in a job I was in, or on the streets speaking to someone who's homeless, or in a drugs den smoking crystal meth, whatever. I learned to adapt to different environments and to fit what was around me, as opposed to focusing on what was inside me. Yeah.
So powerful. That's a wonderful expression of, living out other people's ideas of who you are and the consequences. Hamish, we often avoid failure. It's typically associated with being weak or not enough. Tell me a moment where you have failed and it made you feel weak and not enough.
Don't think I can think of a moment. That's quite difficult too, because life is full of failures. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. But the category I'm thinking of here is relapse. As someone who's now coming up to, at the end of this year, it will be 5 years. In the start of next year will be 5 years since the start of my recovery. It's not been a straight path. It rarely, or never, dare I say, never is. Relapse is the ultimate feeling of failure, especially at times. There is there can be a culture of shame around breaking your sobriety, or I experienced that so many times, this feeling of failure in the last few years of my life, being in recovery groups, and people are getting badges, or getting their coins and things for 1 month sober, 6 months sober, 10 years, whatever it might be. And I was like on a crystal meth come down, because I just dragged myself there 2 days later, 3 days later, and I was like, this is like the best I can do right now. Yeah, that feels crap. It feels crap. And I really had to drag myself there. And I think I mentioned my ex-partner. I think I was really only able to do that at times because she was there. But yeah, it can cause more issues than the initial addiction, is what I would say. The feeling of failing in your recovery, like hitting rock bottom, coming through that, getting on a better path, and like you might be weeks, months, even years into that, and then it all comes crashing down, and that can be worse than the initial rock bottom. that can be worse. That's been my experience, is the feeling of failure, failing myself, failing people around me. Yeah, I had several rock bottoms,
Mm.
several rock bottoms. But what I would say is, like, that is, and this is you mentioned about living in, how did living in Malawi, sub-Saharan Africa as a kid shape my desire to help people? I think that shaped my non-profit career. That shaped my career working mostly for humanitarian organizations. But it was my own struggles with relapse, my own struggles with failure in my own recovery, and then having a coach myself that helped me to reframe it. It was my own struggles in my own recovery, my own failures that compelled me to help other men in that situation. And I lost a few friends to suicide in the last few years, and in some cases we'll never know, how these types of feelings might have impacted them or led to, some of these situations, to friends taking their own lives. And that's why I do what I do.
I get it. I completely get it. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open with us, to the core here. And I relate. I've had many relapses, and every time I relapse, I thought I was a piece of and it's awful. And I had to start building the muscle that relapse is part of recovery. And it's an opportunity to grow. Like we say that in other areas of life, and that's the same in recovery when you're recovering from addiction. And relapse are an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, exactly. And my motto is, with my clients and with myself, is progress over perfection.
It's beautiful, beautiful, Hamish. Thank you for sharing that with us today. In Australia, we have this thing called tall poppy syndrome. We don't celebrate those who are accomplished, and we tear them down. So today, I want to talk about your proudest moment. What are you proud of?
By far, the proudest moment of my life has been opening up about my HIV diagnosis, going public about my HIV diagnosis on the start of this year, the start of 2024. On the 4th anniversary of my diagnosis, I shared it with the world. I shared about my HIV status and also my recovery from addiction. And it's and yeah, I think I've gone through a period this year of, like, intense pride, which I've never felt in my life in the past, living in the shadow for a lot of the past, not really allowing all parts of me to live. In the past, I never really truly had feelings of pride. I had a lot of self-hatred. I had a lot of It was a self-destructive mindset a lot of the time. I didn't show this. I really didn't show this. People probably wouldn't know, but I struggled to say. I don't even know if since I was a child, I think for 20 years of my life, I don't know if I ever said I'm proud of myself,
Mm.
or would have written that or said that. But this year I relearned.
Beautiful. Hamish, I just really acknowledge you for bringing and revealing all of yourself to us. If you hadn't, we wouldn't even been connected. The reason I'm connecting with you is because you revealed all of yourself, and the joy you give to me and to others, the wisdom that you share is living a legacy beyond our physical lives. So thank you so much, Hamish, for who you are and who you be.
Thank you so much, Rugare.
So welcome. How do you keep joy in your life?
I journal about it every single day. Every day. I have a few prompts that I use in my own journaling that have come from different parts of my recovery and different templates I've used and things I've heard. And one of the parts of that journal is 4 emotions. I journal every day about why I'm feeling at that time, in that morning, on that morning, why I'm angry, why I'm sad, why I'm fearful, and why I'm joyful. And I have found that I've never, ever in the times I've been using that in my journaling, which is a couple of years, I've never failed to put an entry for one of those 4 emotions. I have clients I work with, actually, someone said, I've struggled to write anything that I'm angry about. I'm not angry about anything. I always find something for those 4 emotions. And so joy is one of them. So by writing that down, something I am joyful about every single day, I keep it front and center. And it also helps me to realize that whatever I'm going through in my life, there is a reason to be joyful. And I also write down 3 things I'm grateful for every single day. And I have never put 2 and not 3, 1 and not 3, never. There's always 3 things. And many of those days, I'm grateful there's blue skies and sunshine, as there is today in London town.
In London, how
Yeah,
surprising.
yeah. So that's often that's my default when I feel like, or I feel like I'm really not in a good place. There's always something to be grateful for, and that literally rewires your mind to look at the world differently. It's positive psychology. If you write down things that you are grateful for enough, if you write about joy enough, then you will start to find joy and gratitude in any situation, regardless of how difficult it is. You can look for the things to be positive about, as opposed to, as I spent a lot of my life seeing the problems in everything.
Very powerful. I know you have had many difficulties in life, and so have I, but the common thread is that joy is within us, irrespective of what's happening externally. And that's the message I hope many people get, because a lot of the time society tells us that the joy is outside us. No, it is within us. And that's what we've got to get connected to. Thank you for
Exactly.
sharing your experience. It's amazing.
Welcome.
Now, you get to ask me a question. What question would you like to ask me?
So it's a double-barreled one.
Uh-oh,
So
uh-oh.
technically, these are 2 questions,
Uh-oh.
but it's one question with 2 endings. Okay. So
Yes, Coach Hamish.
it might be a curveball, but what's your favorite thing about Zimbabwe and your favorite thing about Australia?
Wow, nobody has ever asked me that.
And it would come from the third culture kid over here.
Of course, of
Always been
course.
into. I used to read atlases. I used to
Yes.
love learning about different cultures, different countries. So I'd love to know what your favorite thing is about Zimbabwe and about
So,
Australia.
so my favorite thing about Zimbabwe is definitely the Victoria Falls. So for me, it is breathtaking. I've had the privilege of going to the Victoria Falls several times in my life. And when I'm there, it's like everything disappears. The roar of the water gushing down the falls. It's there's no words for it, really. But what I also love about Zimbabwe, it's the rich history. And most people in the world won't know about the history of Zimbabwe, the kings, the chiefs, the society, the structures of society. You know, I loved that. And there is always that sense of being connected, being part of community, irrespective of the chaos of Zimbabwe today. So that's what I love about Zimbabwe. What do I love about Australia? Gosh, the too many things, but I think the most recent one is that I found the love of my life in Australia. He's Brazilian. And, on my journey of freedom, I got to find love. I got to set myself free in Australia. And inside of setting myself free, I found the highest form of living. It's love.
Amazing. Amazing.
Great question. Now we're going to go to the BAM lightning round.
Okay.
And this is where you get to share incredible resources and mind-blowing answers. No pressure. So, what is the best advice you've ever received?
It's not the years in your life that matter, it's the life in your years.
Snap.
I don't know who that quote is attributed to. It is attributed many times to Abraham Lincoln, and it's not advice I've had, from. I think it actually came from my dad. It came from my dad that I heard that quote, but it's not his quote. That's
Mm,
what I'm saying.
mm.
But yeah, from a young age, that stuck with me, and it's clearly resonates with me every day. No matter what age I am, I'm going to live today with just as much life and zest as I lived yesterday.
Beautiful. What is one of your personal habits which has led to your success?
Meditation,
What does meditation give you, Hamish?
awareness, awareness of my thoughts, my feelings, and my behaviors. And it gives me peace of mind, and it gives me a deeper connection with myself, and it gives me the ability to love myself.
Beautiful. How are you preparing for the growth of AI in your everyday life?
By using it every day. 3 tools I use pretty much every day. ChatGPT, I use, daily. Motion, AI, calendar. It's a calendar project management scheduling tool. Motion, and Grammarly is another one, which I
Great.
sometimes sense one, right?
Love it. If there's a book you would recommend, what would it be and why?
The book would be, oh, this was a tough one. This was a really tough one.
It's
Going so,
cruel. It's a cruel question.
yeah, I could go in so many different directions, but because the topic has been, the theme of this discussion has been, about recovery and HIV and things, I'm going to throw a curveball in there. And we haven't really spoke much about my involvement with music and creativity, but the book would be The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. Quite a new book. And the reason for that is that, and Rick Rubin is one of the most successful music producers of all time. He's worked with everyone from Johnny Cash, Red Hot Chili Peppers to Jay-Z, and beyond. And he founded the first ever hip hop label with Russell Simmons, Def Jam. So Rick Rubin, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And why? Because everyone is a creator. Everyone has creativity within them. As you said, everyone has joy and love within them. Everyone has creativity within them. And I believe it can set you free, whatever way that manifests in the world. The act of creating, as Rick puts it in his book, is a way of being. And by tapping into our creativity, we can do magic things, I think.
Amazing.
Myself.
Which one of your role models would you have over for a dinner party?
Another cruel question. um, Again, I've gone for a bit of a curveball here because I could go for someone in the world of whatever mental health, well-being, things that have helped me in this last few years. But I'm going to go for just someone I love, who I think would be a laugh to have over for dinner, and that's Louis Theroux,
Oh,
filmmaker.
wow.
Louis
Yes.
Theroux, filmmaker, documentary maker from the UK. Why? Because as a coach, I am always learning the art of questioning, of good questions. And Louis has interviewed, I mean, huge diversity of characters and people from, I don't know, recent interview with Stormzy to, cult families and religions in the US. And uh, I love his style of questioning, and I love the questions he asks. I think he'd just be great conversation and funny guy to have around for dinner. And
Awesome. What do you want to be remembered for?
it's funny because you touched on this with something you said, and it really touched me when you said it, because I was like, that's what I want to be remembered for. I want to be remembered not for anything physical that I do in this world, but for the love I leave in people's hearts so that it can be passed on.
Mm, That's so touching because you're already doing that. You have absolutely touched my heart. Being on LinkedIn, sharing your videos. I didn't know you for a bar of soap. And, I know there's so many people who are watching you, consuming your content, your authentic content, because you're using your voice, you're sharing your life. And I just really want you to know that you've already left it. And I know it's already left within me. And now with anybody who will listen to this podcast. So thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Hamish, I don't want to end. There's so many things. I think I need to have you over for another podcast. We have to talk about your music because I've also looked at that as well, but we just don't have time to and talk about creativity because I'm a creator too. So that's going to be for a different podcast altogether. But I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to your stories, your journey. How can people work with you?
So, as you said at the start, I'm a addiction recovery coach, and I'm based in London, but I work with people online, uh, so all over the world. I help men primarily, but people from all genders and backgrounds. Just tends to be mainly men um, who are struggling with addiction. How can people work with me? I've got three main social media channels I use: Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. You can find out a bit more on there, but also on my website, hamishnoah.com. And there's a lot of information on there. So if you're struggling with addiction, if you are stuck in the cycle of relapse, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, um, any addictive behavior, and you feel stuck in this loop, my mission is to help you break free and to tap into your potential. And get in touch, hamishnoah.com.
Beautiful. And for everybody listening, you must go on Instagram or LinkedIn and follow Hamish immediately. It will give you joy. That's what the experience is, joy galore. So thank
Thank
you
you.
once again, Hamish, for being here
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Rugare, for the invite.
You're so welcome.